And so this was a person who had died in prison and then became a ghost in that prison, except that it had the habit of somebody coming to visit a living person in the prison, and then Anton, the ghost, would go back to that person's house, thereby becoming the traveling ghost. We go to sleep around 3 o'clock in the morning. I suddenly wake up and I see that my phone has turned on, which it would do if it loses power because it was charging. I figured, well, something electrical must have happened. But then I also smelled something funny, like smoke. 30 seconds later, boom, another big pop sound, and now I was concerned. So I turned the lights on. I saw this sort of black, acrid smoke billowing out of the flat panel TV, which is on the other side of the room. We opened the door, and on the other side of the hall was Michael Nahm, the one who gave this talk about Anton, the traveling ghost. And he had the same thing in his place. So the electrical system had gone crazy, and he woke up. And the two rooms right next to us, so 4 of us now are bleary-eyed, 3 o'clock in the morning in the hallway. And so we couldn't find anything wrong electrically. We go down to the night desk and say, is something happening? No, nothing's happening. So we go back up to the room. Things seem to settle down, and I turn the light off, and it won't turn off. So now I'm switching the light back and forth, saying this isn't good. And then it starts flickering. So it's very much like a poltergeist movie. And I'm thinking, oh, this is like a poltergeist movie. So I turn it off, and it stays off. Like the moment that it occurs to me, oh, this is poltergeist-like. When I opened the door and saw Michael Nahm, he immediately said, it's Anton.
Yeah. In this episode, we welcome back to the show Dr. Dean Radin. Dean is the chief scientist at the Institute for Noetic Sciences, or IONS. He is also probably the world's leading psi researcher and author of multiple books, including most recently, which is why he's back on the show, The Science of Magic: How the Mind Weaves the Fabric of Reality. Dr. Dean Radin, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it's always an especial pleasure when it's a new book episode. And that is indeed the case this time with The Science of Magic. So congratulations, another one out the door.
Yep, thank you.
I
can afford enough free time. I don't have any free time, basically, but about every 5 years, I somehow manage, or I get the urge that I must say something, so I put it in a book.
Well, it's funny. I was going to make the joke that it's your second magic book, and you're getting on for like J.K. Rowling levels at this point. Like, are we going to have a magic trilogy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So who is this one for? Because the previous magic book of your many publications, right? The previous magic book was called Real Magic. And this one is called The Science of Magic. So what are you saying with this book specifically? You said every few years there's something that needs to happen as a book.
Yeah. So what I'd proposed to the publishers was to call this just the word enchantment. That's the simple title. And they said no. Their marketing said that wasn't good enough because there are too many books called enchantment, and about 90% of them are romance, fantasy novels, and so it would be confusing. So they said, well, you're a scientist, so it should have the word science in there, and it should have magic in there, and so there you go. So that's what they came up with. So that's a good question. Who is the book for? The book is for people who liked the first book, but kept asking, how do I do it? How do I do magic? So I thought, well, I can't write an entire book about doing magic because I'm not a practicing magician, although kind of, from what I do in the laboratory. But I did put in one of the 4 parts is about practical magic. So it goes through all of the usual things like word magic and not magic and all of the various methods that people use. But I try to point out that all of the methods are essentially the same. And when you get really advanced, you don't need any method at all. It's because it's how you're using your mind. But when you begin, yeah, you need some kind of guidance. So the first part of the book, the reason why I thought it was useful to write this book, not just the practical side, but because in Real Magic, I'm talking in the initial part of it on why science is beginning to move in a direction that will make magic more and more compatible, although it probably won't use that term, saying that the scientific uh, worldview is changing and is changing very rapidly. And so over the last 5 years, it has changed so fast that even now major thought leaders are using words like panpsychism and dualist monism and even idealism. And so I felt it was important to say that because it's when you're out in the field or on the fringe and you're talking about wild ideas and people can say, well, that's nonsense. It's not nonsense anymore if leaders and other disciplines are saying, you know what, maybe we were a little bit too quick to dismiss this kind of stuff. And so that's the direction it's going. So that's like the first part. Second part, I talk about the science of magic, which is similar to real magic, except it's all about the scientific evidence and how there's a one-to-one correlation between magical ideas and what we see in the laboratory. And even in the last 5 years, it is really significantly enhanced. It's partially because there are more experiments to talk about, but more importantly, more meta-analyses
Yeah. Yeah.
that are integrating what we already know. And like almost every single one of them has odds against chance of trillions to one.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you look at the nature of skepticism all along has been, well, maybe there's some flaw in there. Like yeah, it's repeatable, but maybe it's repeatable flaws. So that falls into the basket of questionable research practices. That's the phrase that's used to say it's this flaw, it's that flaw, it's something. So a number of colleagues have been using simulation methods to simulate throwing the kitchen sink of questionable research practices at existing data to say that if all of these flaws were actually in there, would it get rid of everything? And the answer is no, it doesn't. So that gets rid of the flaw argument. So basically, there are no arguments left. And what you see now as the leading edge of what we might say is serious, in quotes, skepticism is that the phenomena are impossible. It cannot be, therefore what you're saying, it's impossible. And when you unpack that and you say, well, why would they think it's impossible? I mean, it's empirical data after all. It's published in peer-reviewed journals. Because what they have in mind is 17th century physics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, charitably, maybe 19th century physics, but they absolutely don't have physics from the 20th and 21st century. So the claim is this is impossible, and what they should fill in there is according to everyday physics, which is classical physics, but it is no longer impossible. So again, they point to the arrow, the direction that physics is going, and it's going to become more and more and more compatible until new words are developed to explain how consciousness interacts with the physical world, and new philosophies, which are actually very old philosophies, the esoteric ideas. Those will also probably get new names. And all of it are euphemisms to kind of get rid of old language barriers. But basically, yeah, we're moving closer and closer to esoteric ideas about magic.
Yeah.
So
This is
that's
actually
what it
why.
is.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to open with who is the book for, because you give we can't call them skeptics, let's call them refuseniks or something, but you give them nowhere to hide, and rightly so, because it's impossible has underneath it an implicit logical fallacy of the argument from authority. But then you list, and rightly so, like the smartest scientific minds of the last 1.5 centuries are actually on this side. They're like, you talk about Wolfgang Pauli and people. It's like, no. The people that you think are on your side are on this side. they're on the psi side. So it's impossible, we have this weight of scientific evidence, is a logical fallacy. But it's a logical fallacy built on essentially an argument from authority, and the authoritative voices in that structure are more on the psi side of things than the non-psi side of things. So that middle third of the book gives them nowhere to hide, and that's why I wanted to open with, like, who is it for? Like, is it for refusenik scientists, or is it for people who do you know what I mean? Like, is it for them, or are you trying to do, which I think
No,
is what it will do, like, I am
no.
making my small contribution to like the discussion field shift so that we do end up in the world that you just kind of reference, where we have different languaging around stuff.
Right. So I am not trying to convince any skeptics because that's a waste of time.
Yeah.
What is happening is skeptics, the ones who spent their entire careers being skeptical, being the voices of this that can't exist, they're getting older. I'm getting older too. But the point is that that kind of skepticism, the it's impossible skepticism, is literally dying out.
Mm.
And so you have more and more younger people who have been trained in more modern versions of physics and the rest of science who are far more open to these things. And so that's who I want to reach.
Yeah.
They're completely open to this idea as well, that they're not locked into an entire career where they have to have certain things to be true. And also, I ran across this interesting thing called the Gell-Mann amnesiac theory. Have you ever heard of this?
I have
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Okay. So Gell-Mann is a Nobel laureate physicist. And so this was something that Michael Crichton, the author, came up with. And it's that you're an expert in some topic and you read a journal or you read something like in Scientific American, some popular magazine, and they're talking about something that you're an expert in. And you immediately see it's completely wrong. Like every single thing in this thing is completely stupid and wrong, and you have all kinds of reasons to say why this is stupid. And so you want to write something back to the journal saying, well, these are all of the reasons why it's not right, and please do this correctly next time. And then you turn the page in Scientific American, and you're looking at some other article where you're not an expert, and you accept all of that because you don't know enough to know
Hmm.
that it's not right. And so the amnesiac problem is that you're looking at the article that you do know about, and you're saying this is just completely wrong. And now you're reading about black holes or something and saying, oh well, okay. And so this is a problem through not just in science but everywhere. It's like how do you what do you believe in anything anymore? So I'm not an expert in everything. Nobody can be, but I'm an expert in one area. And so I could at least try to set the record straight on what it is that I do know and point out for anybody who's interested, which is a growing population, not only in science, but everywhere, that, yeah, we actually know a few things about this. And more importantly, it's important to actually know where we are today. And so one of the other things I talk about in the book here, and I think I mentioned this in Real Magic as well, is when people have these kinds of experiences, whether they're called psychic or mystical or magical or whatever, when they have that experience firsthand, which is way more persuasive than evidence, like scientific evidence, you need to appreciate statistics to know why this stuff is so strong. But if you have an experience, and most people have had one or more experiences that you can say is psychic or magical, it is transformative. Just like a psychedelic experience in the right context would be the most profound experience you've had in your entire life. Well, that's transformative and 99% of the time transformative in a positive direction. That the jargon is pro-social. You go from a jerk into somebody who's compassionate and caring about others and caring about the planet and on and on and on. I mean, it's almost like an overnight transition. It's something opens your awareness that there's way more interesting stuff going on than you had thought. And it's initially a shock, but then you get over it and you become a different person. So these are the kinds of experiences that do that. And we don't actually understand why it does that, other than, I mean, we don't know anything like in psychiatry or psychotherapy that can produce an instant personality change in a pro-social direction. This is it. Well,
Hmm.
then, well, why? I mean, it would help the world immensely if we understood why, and at minimum would be able to create more experiences like this. And so, as any
No.
magician would know, if you don't believe in these things, you've already blocked it from happening. So if I can help push belief a little bit in the direction that these things are possible, maybe that will allow more people to have the experiences, and maybe that would help the entire world.
Yeah, it's funny the why thing, right? Because I was thinking on Real Magic as a little bit more of the what. It's like, oh, here are the data. Like this is like food and water and seed growth intention data, and this is what happens when when you do that. There is a why. There is a magic. The implications of a magical cosmos are in the new book, but not because you can't scientifically explicitly state that. I remember during my shamanic healing training, Alberto Violdo said, "The universe isn't consciousness; it's magic." And like, obviously, different words for more or less the same thing, but it is operationally different to say that the universe is magic, because it's a permission field for flying saints and other things that aren't necessarily what you would immediately think of if we say, like, have a very intense panpsychism. It's sort of fundamentally different, because a magical universe seems to be its participation is implied. So like the human participation in the cosmos. And that's one of the things that I think is really the strongest in this book is it's like our role in a potential magical cosmos is strongly implied, particularly by, like, I was unaware of the meta-analysis. Like, the Gansfeld stuff is crazy. Like, I've always loved Gansfeld material. But to have, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I didn't know that kind of meta-analysis was going on, where it's like, come on, this is more verified than gravity at this point. Like what are we doing here? That was amazing. So for you in this book, I used to have this game where it'd be like, you're at a barbecue, and because this is really the only time you find skeptics, and they're skeptics from a place of ignorance. It's like, oh shit, I did not know that. I don't know what a Gansfeld experiment is, and I don't know about this meta-analysis. And then you kind of tell them, and then all of a sudden they'll switch, and they will say, like, well, actually, the night after my aunt died, I dreamt I had a phone call and it was her. And so it opens up into a magical universe. But what are your barbecue data? What is the thing? You're at the barbecue, Dean, and someone expresses surprise and a little bit of shade about your chosen career. It's like, well, what do you bring out to show them as the crown jewel data?
I've learned not to.
Yeah.
I can give a talk because I'm in control of the sequence and how I present it. And I'll mention in a minute here, I was invited to give a talk at Harvard Medical School in about a month. And so there I'm crafting it very carefully because I know who's going to be in the audience. But for casual conversations, I learned that what I talk about is the biotech company that I founded, because like people instantly have an idea of what it's all about, and I can say, well, we're developing a new method for treating dementia and things like that. That's easy, even though it's a little controversial because it involves genetic manipulation, it's RNA and so on. But then I don't have to get into, I'm studying consciousness. Oh, what does that mean? Consciousness? That's something you can study? You mean like the brain? And I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to go through this whole thing, and I don't want to anymore. That is the reason why I write a book. So I would like, if you want to know what I do, here you go, read this, and then we'll have something to talk about, because otherwise I have to talk 300 pages worth of stuff to kind of get them on board, and it's tiring.
See, I was hoping you were going to say the Anton story, because that's what I would have been.
Well, yeah. So Anton, the traveling ghost. So there are episodes like that. And so one way that I could, if I needed to get into, I can say, well, do you ever have the feeling of being stared at? Did anything spooky ever happen? Somebody came in the house and all the electrical appliances started going haywire. So those are common ways of getting into the topic and addressing them, saying, well, there may be some conventional explanations, but weird things happen. That's why ghost busting is always interesting to people. But it's kind of like it's an entree into the topic, which is not really high on my interest. I've had those experiences, of course. I'd rather talk about the science, but most people don't have the patience for it. Even other scientists don't have the patience for it. So here's a book. Can you read the book?
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And actually, most people, like for real magic, the vast majority of people who bought the audiobook. So they don't even reading anymore. They're listening to it.
Interesting. Yeah, cool. All right. So I love the Anton story. I think like it's in the book for people who are listening. It's Dean and his wife were in a hotel having met someone who had like described this ghost, and then that evening had everyone, well, not everyone, but in a localized area in the hotel, they all experience poltergeist effects, which I think is like the poltergeist is funny as it's such a fraught and hokey category that I'm really glad it's in the book, because it's like also there's some kind of phenomena that go with it, because there's just so many. I mean, some excellent films and some silly ideas have been made around the poltergeist, and it was a really fun addition to be like we're talking about odds against chance and all this actual scientific stuff, but also you can be woken up in the middle of the night by haywiring electrics and have the same thing happening in a localized area in the hotel and be like, okay, something else is going on here.
Let me add a little bit to that story. And by the way, this reminds me that one of the other things I'm doing in this book is making it more personal, because I'm putting in my own experiences throughout it, sort of sprinkling it through to make it more like it's me talking rather than dumping a lot of data. And I did that intentionally because what I haven't, when I'm writing, what I'm listening to is the guy who's going to read it. It's the same reader as for Real Magic. I like his voice. And so I imagine him reading it, and it becomes more like a story. And that's a strategic maneuver to kind of draw people into it because, oh, there's going to be another story, which is easy to listen to rather than another trillion to one odds against chance. So the story is this was at the annual meeting of the Parapsychological Association in 2019, which was held in Paris. And so one of the people gave a talk. His name is Michael Nahm, and that was in 1800 sometime in Germany. And so this was a person who had died in prison and then became a ghost in that prison, except that it had the habit of somebody coming to visit a living person in the prison, and then Anton, the ghost, would go back to that person's house, thereby becoming the traveling ghost. So this whole talk there, my wife and I were there and listening to it and saying, that's unusual. That's a different kind of a ghost. I haven't heard of that before. So we go back to the hotel. We know that some of the other people in the meeting are at the same hotel, but we didn't know where they were. We were tired. We were going to sleep. So we go to sleep around 3 o'clock in the morning. I suddenly wake up because somehow in my unconscious, I hear a pop noise. And so I wake up a little bit and I see that my phone has turned on, which it would do if it loses power because it was charging. So I figured, well, something electrical must have happened. But then I also smelled something funny, like smoke, and the lights weren't on yet, so I didn't know what was going on, but it was a little bit concerning. So I start to go back to sleep, and 30 seconds later, boom, another big pop sound, and now I was concerned. So I turned the lights on. I saw this sort of black, acrid smoke billowing out of the flat panel TV, which is on the other side of the room. And so I woke up my wife and said, "There's something not good here. This could be a fire." And so we both got up. We were preparing to leave the room because we didn't know what to do otherwise. We opened the door, and on the other side of the hall was Michael Nahm, the one who gave this talk about Anton, the traveling ghost. And he had the same thing in his place. So the electrical system had gone crazy, and he woke up. And the two rooms right next to us, both again, either across the hall. So four of us now are bleary-eyed, 3 o'clock in the morning in the hallway. All have been woken up by something weird happening. And we then, of course, start looking for electrical circuit breaker or something and looking out through the window at other rooms to see if this was hotel-wide or just our place. It was just us four. And so we couldn't find anything wrong electrically. We go down to the night desk and say, "Is something happening?" "No, nothing's happening." So we go back up to the room. Things seem to settle down. And I turn the light off, and it won't turn off. So now I'm switching the light back and forth, saying, "This isn't good. You don't want lights like the physical light not to turn off when you turn it off." And then it starts flickering. So it's very much like a poltergeist movie. And I'm thinking, oh, this is like a poltergeist movie. So I turn it off and it stays off that time. Like the moment that it occurs to me, oh, this is poltergeist-like. This isn't like an electrical short or something. I don't know what it is, but okay, it's a poltergeist.
I
I
love it.
forgot to mention that when I opened the door and saw Michael Nahm, he immediately said, "It's Anton."
Yeah. See, this is such a good example of like the young Freud break, right? Because in the book you talk about super psi as less likely, right? But then you kind of Occam's razor stuff like this and go, Anton is a better explanation than, oh, we were all thinking this stuff, and it when you think about it, it's much more on the Occam side of things to be like, no, Jung was right. Like it's more likely to be some kind of spirit in this case, especially as the people Anton picked. Well, now he's famous. Now he's in a book. Do you know what I mean? Like if he hadn't done that to you, now
Yeah,
he's in a book. Yeah,
that's true. I hadn't thought of that. Anton has now traveled around the world in a
exactly.
way that he would never have been able to do before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
when I got the idea that Michael said, "Oh, it's Anton, the traveling ghost," and we sort of laughed. But then when I couldn't turn the light off, I was thinking, okay, if this is like a poltergeist, then I acknowledge you, like I'm
exactly.
remembering. I will remember this. And can
Yeah.
you turn off now, please, so we can get back to sleep? Okay.
Yeah.
And then it worked. So the next morning we go down to the day desk clerk and we say we had all this electrical stuff going on and what's happening, and she immediately said, she spoke only a little bit of English because it was in Paris. She said, "Oh, poltergeist," which
Exactly.
which is which was a little interesting because first of all, of course, you knew what it was, but it suggests that something like that may have happened before,
Mm.
right? Because I mean, how many people are going to immediately say that that's what it was, unless she had encountered it in some way? So it's like the everything was primed. It was ready to go and it needed someone to spark it. And so there we go.
Yeah, I love it. One of the other personal stories which I like that's in the book is you're a bit of a spoon bender yourself.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Yeah. There's my
Amazing.
spoon. Yeah.
That's
So
very cool.
this is a regular spoon. Um, I went to a party hoping to see somebody do this because basically what you end up doing is you pinch it and then it folds over. So I heard about a woman who was able to do that in the past, and I stood in front of her while she was doing this at one of these PK parties and mimicking what she was doing. So she was holding it in one hand like this, and then the other hand kind of pinching, and she wasn't doing anything. Like nothing was happening. I was getting a little bored at this point, and somebody behind me said, "Look what you did." So somebody somewhere did something interesting. Well, who did that? You did, meaning me. So I looked over and it bent about 90 degrees at that point. And I was not even aware of it. And then someone said, keep going. So I just pinched it very lightly and it went all the way over, as you see. I checked it later if this was a trick spoon, if it had been prepared, if it's nitinol, memory metal. It's not. It's a real spoon. And I measured how much torque would be required to do that if you're going to do it by force. And it is way beyond what any normal human being could do. Maybe a trained muscle man might be able to do it, but not doing this.
Yeah.
You need some kind of leverage to do it because the shell shape does not want to bend. I mean, how many times do you have a spoon, even in boiling water and whatever, and it bends by itself? Never. So, yeah, so I did that, and it scared me because I didn't know what I did. I do say in the book this weird mental state I was in, which I think is probably a state that is important for magic because it was a completely obsessive, crazy form of motivation. In my particular case, it was silly in retrospect, but nevertheless, I had a form of motivation which said that basically the universe will end if I don't do this.
Oh, I like it. Yeah.
And so that's what I meant by kind of a crazed sense. It's very unusual for me. I sort of remember what that was like, and it was even a state I don't even like to go into because it feels crazy. Well, a lot of magical practices basically say you need to cultivate that kind of craziness to be able to turn it on and off without going psychotic, because I can
Yeah.
see that could happen too. So yeah, so it's kind of a spontaneous, real magic instance.
Mm. I appreciate that the spoon bending part and the Uri Geller part because despite the fact that he's a Mossad asset and all the other kind of crazy things that have happened to him in his career. I have family stories of his as well. Like my mother went and saw him when he toured Australia in the 70s, and she took her father's watch, my grandfather's watch, that had not worked in 50 years. And he fixed it, like on stage, instantly in front of her. And they'd taken it to watchmakers and so on. So she saw all the spoon bending and was there with friends. And it's like, this guy, he's a stage magician, and this is the point that you actually make in the book. Like, he's a stage magician and all this other stuff with the zany career that he's had. But there's something about Yuri that's like real. There's some there's some actual real magic in there, and it was really quite gratifying to see. Like, oh yeah, like a very unusual career to say the least, but he has some skills.
Yeah, it's very shamanistic, right?
Mm,
You're both. You're both a faker and a fakir. It's like it's all wrapped into one. And unfortunately, from a scientific perspective, or from a perspective where people are looking from the outside saying, I don't know if I can believe this, it's very, very difficult to extract the two.
yeah,
But
exactly.
that's why I put in the book that in the 70s mostly, there were quite a few people that were actually looking into this in some detail. And it's like there's collective amnesia now. Like nobody
Yeah,
remembers that unless they start looking into it. And the results, even way back then, were saying that some people who are pretty good, including some magicians, were saying either this is fake or this is the best magician who has ever lived, like stage
yeah,
magician. So yeah, there's a little bit of both. And of course, I think before I was able to do that spoon bending thing, I was as skeptical as anybody about this because it's just way easier to believe that this is due to dissociation, strength, those sorts of things. And I was well aware of that even while I was doing it. Like, am I using strength? If I did, if you could do that, you would really injure yourself to be
yeah,
able to do it. And there was like nothing. There wasn't even indentations on my fingers.
yeah. It's actually a pretty good segue into the role of belief in a funny way, because making things better. Because the 70s is a good example. Because I remember Dr. Russell Targ saying that during his stage magician era, it was the same thing. There, you have the cold reading tricks to read people's minds, but then you'll also like get hits that's like, wait a minute, that wasn't part of the act. Like I got something that I should not have got. And that his stage magician colleagues at the time would discuss that. They'd be like, yeah, there's some real magic going on underneath whatever it is we're doing up on stage there. And the one of the through lines through this book is a real I hate the word deep dive, it's too AI, but like a real deep dive on the role of belief in almost permissioning greater effects, greater outcomes when you're in like the magic or sci world. And here's a weird, because this is the why book for me. Why? It's a twofold question. Why is the universe built like that? Let's speculate. And why do you suppose brain functioning impairs psi simultaneously if believing in it seems to yield greater impacts on an individual level and a cultural level? Like Ernesto Di Martino found, a 20th century anthropologist, that cultures that have a tradition of magic get better magical results, or better, like more likely to see UFOs and cryptids and what have you. Uh, so we've got two things going on, which is that we appear to be built to dampen it down, but also if we don't, it works better. So speculate for us, Dr. Radin.
Well,
What's the
that one,
why here?
I think I have a good explanation for that. On your first question, though, was why. Why?
Yeah,
And science has no answer to
yeah,
why. Even philosophy doesn't really know why. It's simply that we make observations and we come up with models and so on. But the why question is one that the esoteric traditions have struggled with and come up with their own models of why, but they're no better than what we have today. Like if you spend time with a physicist, like a particle physicist, and you ask, well, why does there an electron? Why does it have a charge? We don't know why. What science does is look at the world from the outside and look for regularities and make models about what it does in other contexts. That's why we can develop technologies. When it comes down to brass tacks and saying what fundamentally is an electron, why is there an electron? You could have a long discussion about particle physics models and the standard model in particle physics, saying, well, it works this way. We're in some kind of medium where things spontaneously happen in this way. That doesn't answer why. So we don't know why. So
Yeah.
the
So I think that's true. The fact that it shows up everywhere, an electron charge is a good example. We don't have a Y for charge. There's just charge. But belief impacting reality, if we put it in that category, makes it like structural to the cosmos. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's big. That's like a big deal. That's not necessarily evolutionary. That's bigger than that, right? And I say evolutionary because some of the things that's interesting in the book that look like Neville Goddard New Thought, I mean, imply that there are things that would make Neville Goddard's approach to New Thought techniques work, is a more accurate way of saying that. So we have the brain appears to, the brain might dislike psi. It might get in the way of psi, but nevertheless, as you've kind of, there's a repeated refrain or a coming back to the idea in the book that psi might be functioning on and with our unconscious to bring about desired outcomes or increase the probability of them happening. So
right.
there's this whole implication that what we believe about reality is structural in the way charge is structural. Looking for the term here. This is what I mean by this book implies a magical cosmos while still staying within what we can find scientifically, but it implies like, well, wait a minute. If belief structures reality, like if it is some kind of force like charge, that's bigger than, oh, this is an evolutionary adaptation to blah, 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 wouldn't you say?
Well, I think the evolutionary argument actually makes a lot of sense for why most people are not experiencing these things in the ordinary conscious awareness state. And so my argument there is, let's say that we do live in an idealistic world, a magical world. As an organism, as an embodied creature, my prime directive is to survive and reproduce. So in order for, if you imagine a bazillion different kinds of Homo fill in the blank, we're Homo sapiens, but there's lots of others that we're beginning to understand that we're around. If you had a version of a hominid that was extremely psychic and actually had difficulty in telling the difference between here and now and there and then, because they could look at Pluto just as easily as they're looking at something right in front of them, they're going to get pruned from the evolutionary tree because the tigers see them and they eat them before they realize, oh, I shouldn't be looking at Pluto right now. So I think this is true across species, that we're forced, we're shaped by evolution, and we have been, because of probably millions of years of getting into the form that we are. The environment shapes us into what we are. So we're shaped in our ordinary waking state to pay very close attention to here and now. All of our senses are tuned to that. Otherwise, as I said, that portion of the tree would have been pruned. We wouldn't be here discussing this. So when do we actually do have contact with the rest of the mental universe, conscious, magical universe? It's when we're not in our ordinary conscious awareness. So that's the dreaming, the drugs, and all the rest of it. And a lot of magical practices, too, are designed to push you away from ordinary state. So that makes a lot of sense to me, because otherwise, it's not as though, and you see this in people who are beginning to study psychic things in the laboratory, you get the sense after a while that you can evoke it. Like, we're going to
Yeah.
make telepathy show up now in the laboratory, which is completely wrong. It's like there all the time. You're finding ways of allowing it to reveal itself. So here's where belief comes into play. You look at different psychological biases that we have, and there's something like 200 that have been identified. So you have the raw world out there, naked reality, and it's filtered and filtered and filtered first by the sensory system and then by a huge range of psychological filters. And so if you don't want to experience something, you won't. I mean, hypnotists do this in their shows all the time. It's like a negative hallucination. You don't see that person, right? After a hypnotic, and they don't. They won't see that person at all. So it's fairly easy And we see this also with things like visual illusions and auditory illusions. You can easily manipulate what is your reality. So you can sort of now reverse that by saying, you know what, we recognize that there are all these filters. Let's change our belief in what we will allow in. And so that's where I think the belief is coming in. So you can maintain kind of a quasi-normal state of conscious awareness, but tweaked a little bit so that you're allowing things to come in that otherwise would not. And so that's why you can now operate even in a waking state and have strange things occur. And so I think the difference between somebody who has natural talent in this realm versus those who generally don't, like the 1% at the upper right side of the normal curve, they have a slightly different genetic basis, different brain morphology, all of which is pushing in the direction that they have a easier way of manipulating those filters. It's combination of belief and filters. And as I said, there's almost certainly a genetic basis. And we're also beginning to find brain morphological differences, which there's, genetics and that are going to be linked. So that's how we're slowly moving towards finding what is the genetic basis of that particular talent. Because we already know from other studies, like we know differences in genetics for people who are good athletes, and people who are good at music, and people who have different kinds of intelligence and so on. So it'd be extremely unusual if psychic ability was not also a talent.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not entirely convinced that, like, let's say we credit, which I don't necessarily, that the underlying mission of life is survive and reproduce. I think that actually runs counter to what we were saying earlier, where we have psychedelic experiences where we come back and go, oh, this isn't a rat race. this is an orchestra. This is a dance. And so I think there's that at the underlying story of evolution, I think, needs some psychedelics, put it that way. Because the trouble with that is, like, okay, fine, then we've got this evolutionary pressure to restrict the psychic capacity, or psi capacity, let's do it that. But then it's showing up at the unconscious, where, like, so in that case, in the evolutionary model, that would be, your unconscious psi capacities are bringing about, like, go right rather than left, and there's more walnuts in that tree, is where you think that comes from.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the reason why the physiological experiments in the laboratory work so much better than ones where you're asking somebody to consciously report is because their conscious mind is not involved at all. And yet you still see really, really good psi responses in the body, which means it's an unconscious response.
Yeah.
So it's as though we have all of these senses and the brain is busily preparing it and turning it into a cartoon, but there are other things coming in too. Now, some of it might have something to do with ordinary senses, but I don't think so. I think that it's more like consciousness is a field, and we can probe our immediate or afar environments in ways that can help us. And most of that is not conscious, almost by definition. So I forget if I mentioned in the book about this this experiment that was done with people learning how to do day trading at a London day trading school. And so they took measures of interoception on all of the students, which is the degree to which you are aware of what's normally unconscious, like your heartbeat. So there are standardized ways of measuring the degree to which you're aware of that. And they found later that the people who did the best in doing things like futures trading, which is basically a coin flip, the ones who were systematically doing really well, they had the highest degree of interoception, which suggests that they have closer contact to their unconscious, which I think is the same reason why long-term meditators tend to do better in psi tasks as well.
Yeah, cool. Well, that brings us neatly to the Gansfeld meta-analyses, because one of the things that I've always liked about Gansfeld experiments is the implication of the things that we're more likely to notice. I think says something about how to use like Neville Goddard speak, like that desire structures the universe, right? But like the meta-analysis, I think it was 2020, I forget, in the book that you describe is insane. Like if you want to give people an overview of what was found there, it's crazy.
Yeah, I didn't know how to present the results because the probability, if you talk about probabilities, you can just invert it basically and end up with odds against chance, which people understand better. But so there's a long thing, like there's 10 with 30 or 40 zeros after it. I forget how many, a lot of them. And so I wanted to come up with a name for that because otherwise the reader who's going to do the audio version will have to say, well, it's like 10 with 40 zeros, which is true, but it has a name also. So I had to do some searching to figure out how do you name something that is a number that big, some gigantic number. And what it says is that the reason why I do that, and I have a section describing, well, what do I even mean by this, the odds against chance? The reason you mention that is because you want to say that the skeptic is always calling for extraordinary evidence
Mhm.
because these phenomena are considered extraordinary, so you need extraordinary evidence. And the question then is, well, how extraordinary do you need it? Is like 1,000,000 to 1 good enough? How about 1 billion? How about 1 trillion? How about 1 trillion trillion? Or 1 trillion trillion trillion, which is kind of the numbers that we're talking about here. So all it's really reflecting is that in any given experiment, rather than choosing the correct one of 4 cards, it's as though you're choosing one out of 3 cards. So that's the statistical thing that's going on. It's like a 5% better than chance effect. But it's been repeated thousands of times in lots of laboratories around the world. So we see that as a real effect that is repeated again and again and again. The numbers just add up and you end up with odds of a gazillion to 1 against chance. And so, what do you do with that? So there are still people who are not quite sure to know what they do with these kinds of things because it's not taught in ordinary school. So they want to see it for themselves, which is perfectly reasonable. So they'll do yet another replication. So this has been going on for 50 or 60 years now, and there's lots and lots and lots of replications. That's why these numbers keep getting so big. The same is true for lots of other things, presentiment, precognition, remote viewing, you name it. All of the psi perception types of effects are odds against chance of a gazillion to 1.
Yeah.
And so
For people,
we're now
yeah,
doing
go on.
something which is way more difficult, right? That sort of proof-oriented stuff. It exists. The next question are like what you were asking, well, why does it exist? How does it exist? Can we make it better? Those are far more difficult because we need to change our ontology even to begin to make advances there. And that's really tough because if you want to be a scientist and do things in a scientific way, you're kind of forced into the materialistic viewpoint and the epistemology which is developed in that viewpoint. And then we're kind of stuck because I don't think this fits in a materialistic model. You need something way more comprehensive.
Yeah. For people who are maybe unaware, because I've always loved the like the analog implications of Gansfeld, like why it's a step up from say Zener cards or what have you. But like just describe a Gansfeld, a hypothetical Gansfeld experiment for people so they can understand like why I think that's a little bit Neville Goddardian.
Yeah, so ESP cards are part of a class of studies called forced choice. So you have 5 cards, the answer will be one of the 5. They're easy to do. There were lots and lots of experiments like that. I've certainly done it as well. And they're also trivial to evaluate the results. Like, chance with 5 cards is going to be 20%. And so you look at what you actually get, and it's very easy to handle it. It has a significant downside, though, in that if you know that there are 5 possibilities and you have to choose the one, whether it's telepathy or precognition or whatever, you immediately start counting in your head. Like I chose one before, it's probably not going to come again, so I won't choose that one, so I'll choose something else. But if it's a truly random system, you're fooling yourself and actually works against you. So you do get good results of those tests, but you need huge amounts of data to be able to see anything at all. So Gansfeld, remote viewing, and a few other classes are called free response. So the person simply comes whatever comes to mind. So there could be four targets, four images typically, or video clips, which are selected to be quite different from each other. One is chosen at random. That's given to your, quote, sender, who will mentally send it to you, but you have no idea what these are. You know that over the next 20 minutes, somebody's trying to mentally send you something. So you simply talk out loud anything that comes to mind. That is a lot closer to what happens spontaneously in the real world, so it has more ecological validity to it. And then at the end of the sending period, you're taken out of this Gansfeld state, which is like a sensory deprivation, sort of. And anything you said is played back to you, like an audio recording to remind you what you said, because it's kind of hard to remember once you're in that state. And you're shown four pictures, one of which is the one that was being sent, and three decoys. Again, you and anybody you're dealing with at that time, like a research assistant, they have no idea what the target is. But your job then as a subject is remember your internal state and try to match it against what you think the other person was sending. So again, it's like you're going to be right 1 in 4 times. So you say, I think this is probably the best match. Maybe this is number 2, 3, and 4. So you can do rank ordering, you can do exact hits, you can do all kinds of things. And so on the basis of that kind of experiment, you have 3 or 4 people spending 90 minutes generally to get one data point. So given that the database is something like 4,500 of these sessions, that's a lot of labor involved in order to get these data points. But still, you add it all up and you get gazillions to 1 against chance. And more importantly, as I reported here, that a group of skeptical professors said, this is bullshit. We're going to do this again. We'll just try this again. And they got the same results, which they didn't believe. They actually said this must have been, they attributed it to what they called a crud factor, which is that there's always noise and everything. So somehow their significant result that's exactly the same as everybody else's result. They didn't believe it. And so they said, no, it's got to be crud, without saying what the crud was, because nobody knows.
One of the things that was mentioned at the end of that in that section in the book is that people who have a creative bent, whether they're artists or whatever, typically are better at Gansfeld work. So Neville Goddard would do his manifestation techniques by getting into a hypnagogic state. He'd relax and relax and relax, which is very easy to do if you have 1.5 to 2 bottles of wine for lunch, which he also did. And in that state, he would envision entirely the future that he was selecting. And that was it. And then you'd come out of it, or then you'd sober up, or what have you. And he was very good at it. And there is something about Gansfeld where you look at the edge of that and go, well, you are predicting the future, but that's at that level, particularly if you want to bring in, quantum implications. It's like, okay, selecting and predicting when you're in that state, like where are you going to carve this? But he spent decades, for years, adamantly telling people to get into a hypnagogic state for about 20 minutes, or as you're going to sleep or what have you, and stepping fully into the reality, and then coming back and done. Right. And it's so interesting to me that this is to your earlier point in the episode where you're like, when you start off in magic, you need sigils, you need this, you need that. And you need that until everything's a Dumbo feather. You need that until you don't, until you've done that enough times to realize, wait a minute. I have a theory that it's not actually my little pen and the paper that's changing reality. That might be crazy, but it might actually be the reality I step into, like how I am in the world and in my mind that does it. And so I love the Gansfeld stuff when I think about Neville spending decades going like, listen, just get as drunk as he doesn't actually say that, but like get into a hypnagogic state and select a reality, and then come out and assume that it's going to happen and don't even think of it. And it generally does. And I don't know about the generally. I think he was remarkably good at it. But nevertheless, you start to, what I love about this book is you can unfocus your eyes and go, I see the structure of actual magic here amongst these things. And there's what you can find in a lab, which is different to that. But if you unfocus your eyes and are generous, you can say, well, this is what we found in a lab. Dare we speculate as to what that looks like in reality? And this book, I think, is a really fun ride in that direction.
Yeah. So the third part of the book is analyzing what magicians have said and people in the New Thought world. Like, what have they said? What do we see hints of that in the laboratory, kind of mash it all together, and you can kind of come up with a recipe, which ultimately is exactly what you just said. Like, I would really like this to happen. Probably not said in your ordinary state of mind, something slightly below that, metaphorically. And then you get gears going in motion, which are probably unconscious because it's like you're everywhere all at once. You're spread out through the universe, and you have two things that could happen, and I think happen simultaneously and in parallel. One is I can perceive things that are likely to happen. So I can simply put myself in positions to take advantage of that. It's like smart luck. And the other one is I have agency. I can force things to happen too. In both cases, like I'm getting trickles of information, I'm pushing trickles of information. You put all of that together, and the thing that you want, you can optimize the likelihood. So I got tons of emails from people after reading Real Magic. How do I win the lottery? Like, what exact sigil do I need to do in order to win the lottery? So I write back saying, well, what are the odds against chance of the lottery that you want to win? 300 million to 1. And so I say, if you're doing really, really good, you could probably reduce that by a factor of 10, maybe more than that. So instead of like 300 million to 1, you could bring it down to maybe even 3 million to 1 or 1,000,000 to 1. But that's still 1,000,000 to 1. So I would say it's much better, especially if you want to do this as a magical act, to get something like a pick 3 lottery, where the odds are way better. So if the odds are 1 in 300, you might push it down to 30 to 1, which if you play long enough, yeah, you can end up winning more. And so it becomes a probability game. Occasionally something massive will happen. But again, it's still about pulling the probabilities. That does not explain why this spoon got bent in half.
That's exactly, yeah. So, because you include, which I love, obviously Pete Carroll's sort of probabilistic equations of magic, and because I'm more than familiar with the wacky sigil emails, believe me, and one of the things that, because I'm remastering the sigil course now, I started it in Paraguay and it'll be done in the next month or so, and the first time around, I did describe it probabilistically, like sigil magic is probability enhancement, and it is. Except, like later on in that section of the book, you use and rely on Dr. Jeff Kripal's research about floating saints and so on. And like the shaman that I was dieting with a couple of months ago, he would tell me stories about people who would vomit up tumors, and not like stomach tumors, like liver. So it has to travel as well as be vomited up into the bucket during an ayahuasca ceremony. And I think, I don't know, I'll get your take on this. Like, is the probabilistic frame of how magic works itself a Dumbo feather? Or is it actually quote unquote true as far as we can tell, and that just sometimes someone's going to get the 1 in a million chance anyway, because that's how it works. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm not sure. I think a slight probabilistic shift, which we can observe in sigil magic and whatever very easily, like, I don't think that's the macro story. I think the macro story is floating saints and vomiting tumors. And I think that the probability stuff is part of that belief shifting, like, oh, if I believe this will work, it will work better. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, I completely, I agree with you that the probabilistic story is a way, kind of a modern way of modeling what's going on for low-level psi. And so I'm making a distinction here. There are lots and lots of low-level stuff going on all the time, and we can manipulate that. The big stuff, though, the levitation, the gravity manipulation, spoon bending for real, those things, it could be probabilistic because, after all, from a probability perspective in quantum mechanics, you're starting out with a superposition and suddenly it goes boom, and you go from a gazillion possibilities to 1 in one shot. So that's sort of the very, very tiny world of probability collapse. And so in which case, yeah, if you can push probabilities of something that are 300 million to 1, say, I'm going to force this to be 1, I can kind of see, yes, so occasionally that happens. It, of course, immediately begs the question, well, why would that happen? How does that happen? Well, I don't know how that happens, but it could. Even then, it doesn't explain levitation. So I don't have a good answer to that unless you start pulling away, like a probability works really well in a materialistic framework. That's why it's easier, like from a scientific perspective, to talk about it in that. But if in fact we live in an idealistic framework instead, where materialism is like a special case that we feel comfortable in, but you expand out a little bit, then anything is up for grabs. I mean, you could shrink a planet into the size of a marble if you wanted to. I mean, you can do literally anything. I think that the rest of the universe doesn't allow us to do that very often. We're constrained because at that level we're talking probably about a conscious universe.
Yeah.
Of which we're a tiny little piece of it. I mean, we feel like we're a little piece of it, even though it's big. And so, only in a way that we can use language, we're saying that I would like to shrink the entire world into the size of a marble. And meanwhile, the rest of consciousness is saying, no, no, Mr. Baby Man, don't do that. That's not a good thing to do because you're disturbing a lot of stuff if you do that. Don't do that. In fact, you can't do that. I will not let you do that. Whereas occasional flying, sure, that's not going to bother things too much because it takes a very small change in gravity to do that, like a super small change. So I'll give you an example. One of the experiments that I'm working on is seeing whether or not intention can change the length of a light beam. So I have a very sensitive interferometer. I have two light beams that are the same length, and you can tune it so that it's basically exactly the same. And so one of them will be a target to a person to say, just shrink that, pull it down. And there's just feedback showing what the variation is in length. If you can pull it back, if you can like shrink one of the light beams, this is from a laser, down about the size of the diameter of a proton, not much, 10 to the minus 16th or so, you can shrink it a little bit. There's several ways of then thinking about how is that possible. Well, we're talking now about fundamental constants. Well, constants maybe not so fundamental because you're either manipulating the speed of light, which I guess maybe you can do that, or you're manipulating the fabric of space-time itself, or you're manipulating gravity because you can create all kinds of interesting effects if you change gravity. So I calculated if I was able to pull this one beam down by the width of a proton, what is the equivalent gravity that would be necessary in order to do that actually out in space? If you're in space, you have these long beams of light and you want to make one a little bit shorter, you could do it with a mass by shaping space-time. Okay, well, what would it take? It would take an asteroid approximately the size of Texas to do that. And so, well, okay, I think, oh, well, that's like a gravitational thing. Well, it's one of a number of different interpretations that's going on, and it requires a tiny, tiny little change in something like a light beam, which might be happening all the time, except that we hardly ever measure such things. Is it my mind warping space-time literally? Well, that would be interesting, but now we have tools where we can actually measure it. So that's behind me on the screen over here is my interferometer, where that's the kind of a thing that I'm looking at now. That's my lab work.
See, that I love that because it reminds me of Dr. Sheldrake, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake saying like, speed of light used to be different. Like if you look at when they were measuring it in the 30s and 40s, it's different to now. So as you say, like it's something more interesting than these platonic constants are certainly happening. But it would, do you know what I mean? Like, of course, we don't even have the right words. Like manipulating is what you would say because it's an experiment, but I want to say it shamanically, like participating. And the reason I want to say that is one of the things that I absolutely loved in this book is the implication that people in the future are altering or participating in our contemporary behaviors. And there's some remarkable experiments to do with like supermarkets in Vienna. And I'll tell you why that's interesting to me is that when I was visiting my friend Matafera Lloyd in New Zealand, and he was talking about what he's doing with this land that he's got back from the government, that they're removing the radiata trees, and he can see the return to the kind of like traditional New Zealand native growth that's going to happen on his ancestral land 7 years or 7 generations in the future. And we had this long discussion about how there are people at that 7 generation point that are praying for him as ancestors. And that there are beings, we had this conversation, it was a really fun evening, that we would consider UFOs that are like millions of years in the future, that are elevating us right now as ancestors. And we have this idea of like, wow, that's wonderful. Because shamanically, you deal with the ancestors and you also deal with the descendants. So you're in this place where it's, dare we say, forwards and backwards in time. And what is so great about this book is you find that the best possible science that doesn't prove any of that. You can't prove that stuff, but you can tantalizingly wink at, oh my goodness, that when you say that the universe is participatory, that's in all directions.
Yeah, so space and time are irrelevant from that perspective. Especially if you put on your hat of idealism anything you can conceive of that may have nothing to do with space and time, like the experiments that I talk about. It's true. It doesn't prove retrocausation, but it demonstrates it.
Exactly.
So, and I think I also mentioned there's a whole bunch of other experiments using random number generators. Some of the optical experiments I'm doing are also retrocausal. Like when people do the experiment, which will be online, by the way, it's an online experiment. Sometimes you're getting real-time data being streamed from the device, and sometimes you're getting data from 3 months ago. And you have no way of knowing which is which. Yeah. And so the reason I'm doing that is because I'll be able to then compare. Does it make a difference? Like, is your intention locked into now? I think almost certainly not. And that means that provided that I haven't looked at the data yet, like it's still in some weird superposition state, so it's not locked into being a certain way, we can influence it. We can participate with it. And so actually what you're mentioning is a really good idea, that to get people to fall in love with the object of which I want to influence in some way. And you're right, it's not really influencing, it's participating in a shamanic way. I am the light. The light is me. Those kinds of things. I need to think of a way. It's more difficult to do when you're doing a web experiment because you have no control of what people are actually doing. But now that I think of it, I'm going to have to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, it's the sneaking in before the data are revealed. I've mentioned him twice already, but so Alberto's wife, Marcella, the energy healers, she's particularly good at getting in if someone's gone in for a test. And before they've got the results, that's her specialty. Of when the outcome, like, oh, is this cancer, is this benign, is it whatever, that's when she does her best work at it. So it scales up out, like in ways. This comes back to the probabilistic framing is obviously very useful and not wrong necessarily, but it might be a Dumbo feather for what's quote unquote actually going on in the cosmos, which is that participatory approach, which the book lands really elegantly in the invitation to look at different like home belief systems for doing this kind of rigorous scientific work, right? And I like the humility of not knowing. Like, well, you haven't found it out, and it'll be after both of our lifetimes as the project of, I guess, scientific discovery gets to evolve and change and what have you. But like one of the ones that I've always been a fan of, like if I'm not an animist, I'm a dual aspect monist. And I learned that from Dr. Kreipel. And I think that's one of these frames that is philosophically rigorous and doesn't break anything we know about science.
Right.
That invites us into like, okay, well, the materialist paradigm is over, and they're dying, as you say. The Niels Bohr paradigm of science advances one, or paraphrase of science advances one funeral at a time. And something like dual aspect monism allows us to reposition the data that we do have that are rigorous and go, all right, well, what happens if we sit here and do things?
Yeah, and you're right. It doesn't require changing any textbooks, which is a
No.
major fear of a lot of professors who
Yeah.
spend their lives writing those books. Um, and it expands our worldview. That's basically what science has always done. You start with a worldview that this is the way it is, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Every time we have a new instrument, the world expands. Well, the world hasn't changed, but our understanding and our view of it has. So an example is for many years, since 2000, I've had this online psi testing site called Got Psi. And so we've collected hundreds of millions of trials from lots of people, including a remote viewing test. So you're going to see a picture, enter some words, enter some descriptors. And so of the 2.4 million trials that we have, it's actually a little more than that. Of those trials, you take out all of them where somebody entered words that describe their future experience of a randomly selected target. So I've been using neural networks, a type of network called a Siamese network, so called because it's two twins that are conjoined, two neural network twins. So you train one of the networks on, here's a person who said something about their actual target that they ended up with. And here's an example of the same person getting a different target. So this is a match, this is a mismatch, and you simultaneously train that, and you train it and train it and train it, and then you apply what it learned to new data that it hadn't seen before. You say, well, did it actually learn anything? Is there a signal? The answer unequivocally is yes.
Mm.
You apply simpler statistics, like frequentist methods or Bayesian methods, you don't see it. So neural networks, machine learning, is a kind of a new tool. It allows us to see things in a way that we couldn't see before. And so we have this massive online database of remote viewing where people are just like anybody, just trying the best to select something. And we can detect with very high certainty that on average, they can do it. It's a very tiny effect because they're unselected, unvetted people, but the phenomenon is there. And so I'm in the process now of finishing all that up, and then I'll write up an article, and I'm going to submit it to a mainstream journal as detection of an anomalous information transfer, because it happens to be retrocausal,
Sure.
with using a Siamese neural network. So I'll focus on the methodology, and then like at the very end say, oh, by the way, this is precognition, and hoping
Yeah.
that referees don't see it until then, and they say it's okay.
I
Because
love
if
it.
they do see up front, this is precognitive remote viewing, boom, it will not even be
Yeah.
looked at.
So that's super interesting because I guess the final question was going to be because you've been on the show a few times and we've spoken about how you ended up in this as a career. And when I look at where it is now and the things that you're doing are obviously best in class. When you look back on it so far, what was the surprising thing that you found? Like you start off going like, okay, there's something to this, and I'm going to go and find it. But like, is it something as the universe is magical? Like it's not that psi is real or something. It's that when you look back on all these incredible psi adventures you've had, Dr. Radin, like what is the thing that you didn't expect to find that you've got now that's like really valuable? Would you say?
Well, that's similar to the question I get sometimes is what's the most amazing psychic thing you've ever seen? My answer is my career.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it was pretty early on, like even in college where I was reading books about parapsychology and thinking, that's got to be the most interesting thing that anybody could possibly do. Because I'm temperamentally drawn to things that are not already known. Like most scientists really are interested in the edge of what's known. Because otherwise you'd be a technologist. You're like using stuff that's known. You can make things as an engineer. I was never interested in that. I always wanted to know what is beyond what we currently understand. And so in any field, there is that. You can find that. That's what scientists do at the edge. But I've always had an intuitive sense that something about the mind is way more powerful than we give it credit for or that we understand. And so that's what drew me. They're saying, oh, there really is something interesting here going on. We don't understand it really at all, but the implications of it Like we need an entirely different ontology, or one that's way expanded from where we are. I don't know. Just like what you could ask somebody who becomes a professor of philosophy. They usually know pretty early that that's what they're interested in. Well, why would a kid in third grade want to become a philosopher? Well, they don't even know maybe what the word means, except that they know that they have like existential angst, which I had in third grade. I was already thinking in third grade that, why are these kids acting like this? I remember very specifically on a few occasions where kids are like monkeys in the third grade. They're basically, I don't know, 8 years old, something like that. And kids were acting up. And I remember very specifically thinking, and I wrote about this in one of my books, what's wrong with these kids? I'm saying as an 8-year-old. So where does that come from? I don't know where that comes from, but it means that I was sort of arrived here already somewhere between a scientist and a philosopher, and was always intrigued and pulled in that direction. And so when I would read science fiction and the earlier versions of Harry Potter, which came much later than me, something about them resonated. I was saying, of course, this is fantasy, but it's based on something. It's like even pure fantasy is still we wouldn't resonate with it at all unless there was something in it that there was to resonate with. That's why mythology and fairy tales and so on, that's why they're so powerful. Something about the story. And it's not just infantile magical thinking and all of the other usual explanations for it. No, it's something deeper than that. So that's why I figured if I need to craft a career, because there are no such careers really, and one that pays for you to do that, I want to figure out how to do that. So I manifested this career.
I
So I
love
get
it.
students all the time saying, well, how, I'm a college student. I want to learn how to do what you're doing. Manifest it,
Yeah.
find out what you're completely passionate about and spend a lot of time thinking, and not just thinking, but like being that. And then, of course, a lot of strategic things you do along the way. You meet the right people, you go to the right conferences, you just do stuff too. You don't just sit at home waiting for it to happen, but somehow you can all pull it together. So that's what I mean then by crafting or manifesting a career.
I like it. And so I actually went to his wedding in the desert, but the ufologist Richard Dolan began as a historian, just like normal Cold War historian, and started to get intrigued at some of the documents to possibly pertaining to UFOs from around that era. And now he's a preeminent ufologist. And he said, I started this project as an historian. I thought maybe I'd spend one summer looking at some of those Cold War era classified documents. And now it's 35 years later. And I'm married to a remote viewer. And it was this thin doorway into philosophy and the implications of being in a universe. And that story of like, oh, my career is the magical object I found, I absolutely believe. And I know something about manifesting careers that haven't previously existed, or at least not for a while. And you have the frame of like, oh no, because of the virtue of the career, it's a loop. You have this frame where you can recognize the preciousness and significance of it. So it's like that the value is like, oh yeah, because I manifested a career researching psi and parapsychology, and because of the things I learned in that career, I know how unusual this thing this thing that I have is, and that I participated in its creation. It's like I like that. I think that's clever. Yeah.
Yeah. But it also carries, though, a sense that this is important.
Yeah.
So, so it's a combination of all of that. Yes, I'm interested in it. I could be interested in lots of different things, but I feel pulled as well. So maybe it's me pulling myself from the future or pushing from the
Exactly.
past, or who knows what it is. But it's more, it's not quite an obsession. That's too strong, but it is a pull.
Yeah, I like that. It's a pull in a career that, if it does its job correctly, will go away.
Right.
We only need parapsychology because we don't allow, there is ultimately no, from a scientific perspective, difference between cellular division and telepathy. Like it's a thing that exists,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
this marvelous career that uh, if you do your job, there are people. You're an ancestor to people several centuries in the future who are thanking you for having parapsychology dissolve into
Yeah.
back into
Well,
science.
there's no doubt the para is going to go away. We won't
Yeah.
need the para anymore. There'll be a new name for it. And I've been pushing for years, every time I'm president of the Parapsychological Association, we need to change the name because the name is too sensitive for the academic world. We can't get thousands of students to understand the nature of what we know already. And that is a very severe limiting
Yeah.
practice. So we're over an hour here, so I'll just mention one last thing. So I haven't traveled anywhere since COVID began. Since that, like the last place I traveled was Paris in 2019, where I met
Right.
that traveling ghost. And so as a result of it, I got out of the road warrior sense, and it's just way more comfortable to do this than to get on a plane and do all the rest of it. So I've been invited many times to give talks here and there and whatever. And I say, well, I can do it by Zoom. So I do that sometimes, but then other places, no, you have to be here. So a couple of weeks ago, I get a call from somebody I know at Harvard Medical School. It says, would you like to give a plenary talk at this conference we're holding at Harvard Medical? Oh, that's like a different, okay, that might be something I can't refuse.
Mm.
And can I use the opportunity to talk about my new book? Yes, you can do that. I'm thinking, bing, okay. Well,
Yeah.
so I am going to Harvard to give a
Excellent.
talk at Harvard Medical, which is revolving around the theme in my book. The book comes out on October 21st, but this will be October 10th. And so I asked the publisher, can I have some copies of it? Like, I don't know when they actually do a print. Said, yeah, we'll have some copies. So, well, here it is. I have this book. I'm not going to give away the book, but I'll give cards away saying you can order this now. It'll be out in 2 weeks. So, and a few days later, there's another conference at MIT, next door, kind of.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so I'm not going to give a talk there, but I have a VIP pass to be able to participate with that conference too. So I figured, okay, I can do that. So
Excellent.
one other thing then that kind of ties it all together in a very interesting way is Dan Brown has written books like Angels and Demons. That is among the 10 or so books that he's published, like 200 million have been sold. It's like near Harry Potter land. And so he has a new book that came out today called Secret of Secrets. The underlying theme throughout the entire book is non-local consciousness. He mentions the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I work, a number of times. He mentions me by name, which is freakish because I think I'm not a fictional character, but somehow I showed up in the book. And it's a thriller, so it has all the usual thriller elements in it. And so the character in the book in the beginning is a noetic scientist who gives a talk at this big thing that's in Prague. And I had previously prepared my talk already for Harvard, and now I'm reading the book today. Like,
Yeah.
that's the talk. That's what I wrote. And like
Yeah.
nobody knew, maybe his editor knew, but nobody knew it was in the book. And that's so like what's her talk, the character is giving the talk that I was preparing to give at Harvard. So I figured, okay, well, that's an interesting coincidence.
That's
Did
wild.
I, did I pick it up from the book or did I don't know what happened, but yeah. So there's kind of a,
Co-creating a field shift whose time has come for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing.
And so I mean, the whole book is basically about noetic science. Okay, well, then that's going to reach 20 million people in a way that I won't be able to. And then the next bit is that I'm working with a Hollywood producer to create a new TV series, science fiction series based on the Stargate program. So
Oh,
there will be
cool.
a fictional intelligence agency that's using psychic fill in the blank. And so
Very cool.
I'm an executive producer on that. So I get to shape how the narrative goes in that program. So yeah, it's all coming together.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. So you said October 21, The
Yeah.
Science of Magic. I assume pre-orders are available usual places.
Yeah.
Amazing. And for people who want to get in contact and follow along, and obviously, do you know if the Harvard Medical presentation will be available on
It
YouTube
will
or
be
similar?
filmed. It will be eventually on YouTube. Yes.
Amazing. All right, cool. So anywhere else people can go to find out more about what you got going on and all of that, Dr. Radin?
DeanRadin.com, noetic.org. And so if you're
Amazing.
going to write to me and say, how do I win the lottery using sigils? Just don't. Don't do that.
I second
No.
that.
No. If on the other hand, if you read my book and you fall in love with something like not magic, which is one of my favorites, okay, you could write about that a little bit. Because
Amazing.
it's kinesthetic. It's something that is quite different than purely mental.
Absolutely. Well, all right. Always a pleasure. Once again, congratulations on the book. It is fantastic, as we've all come to expect, and highly recommended. Maybe the best book I've read this year. It's really good. And so if you're listening at home or wherever, go and pre-order. It's top stuff.